I can't believe it.
The morning chill of Vermont autumn seeped through my windows as I sat at my kitchen table, coffee growing cold between my palms. My eyes couldn't move from my iPad screen, fixed on the image my daughter Marcelle had accidentally sent me last night. My hands trembled as I zoomed in once more, scrutinizing every pixel of the photograph that threatened to unravel my entire life. There he was, Howard, my husband of 40 years, the man I had buried 2 years ago. But in this photo, dated just 5 years ago, according to the timestamp, he stood smiling beside a woman I'd never seen and 2 teenage children on what appeared to be a Christmas morning. The Christmas he had supposedly been at an engineering conference in Chicago. "This can't be right," I whispered to the empty kitchen of my Burlington home. The space that had once felt like the heart of our family, now suddenly alien and cold. I was 67 years old, too old for such earth-shattering revelations. After decades as a history professor at the University of Vermont, I'd thought I understood how to piece together facts, to construct narratives from fragments of evidence. Yet here I was, unable to reconcile the man I married with the stranger in this photograph. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcelle. "Mom, ignore that photo I sent last night. Wrong recipient. Delete it, please." Too late. Far too late. I hadn't spoken to my daughter in nearly 3 weeks, our conversations growing increasingly strained since Howard's death. Now I understood why she'd been acting strangely. Had she known? Had everyone known except me? I typed back with fingers that refused to remain steady. "Who are those people with your father?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. Finally, "I'll call you later." Not good enough. After 40 years of marriage, 2 children, and a life built on what I thought was solid ground, later wasn't acceptable. I dialed her number, listening to it ring 5 times before going to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. A 3rd time, and she picked up mid-ring. "Mom, I'm in a meeting. I can't talk about this right now." "You've known, haven't you?" My voice sounded foreign to me, stripped of its usual measured professorial tone, raw and exposed. "How long?" The silence on the other end told me everything. 3 years, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I found out just before Dad got sick." The timeline clicked into place. Her sudden coolness toward her father during the last months of his life. The hushed conversations with her brother Ben that would abruptly end when I entered a room. The peculiar behavior of some of Howard's colleagues at the funeral. "I need to understand," I said, my shock hardening into something else, determination. "Mom, please, let's talk when I can come up to Burlington. This weekend?" "No." The firmness in my voice surprised even me. "Today, after your meeting, call me back." I ended the call before she could protest and set my phone down next to the iPad, the damning image still glowing on the screen. In it, Howard looked happy, genuinely happy, with his arm around a petite woman with warm brown eyes and graying chestnut hair. 2 teenagers, a boy and a girl, stood in front of them, wearing matching sweaters. They looked like a family, a real family. What did that make us? I picked up my phone again and called the one person I knew would tell me the unvarnished truth. Eleanor Rhodes had been my best friend since our undergraduate days, the woman who had stood beside me through every major milestone of my adult life. "Margaret?" Ellie answered on the 2nd ring. "What's wrong? You never call this early unless something's happened." "Did you know about Howard's other family?" The silence that followed lasted only seconds but felt like an eternity. "Oh, Maggie," she finally sighed. "How did you find out?" The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. I'd been clinging to the desperate hope that there was some explanation, some misunderstanding that would preserve the life I thought I had lived. That hope evaporated with Ellie's words. "You knew," I whispered, "and you didn't tell me." "I only suspected," she corrected quickly. "After I saw him in Boston that time, when he claimed to be in Denver. I convinced myself I was mistaken. It couldn't possibly be Howard, I thought. But then at the funeral, there was a woman who stayed at the back of the church. She never approached, but the way she looked at him." I closed my eyes, remembering the service. I'd been so consumed by grief and arrangements that faces had blurred together. Had she been there? This other woman? Had she mourned him too? "I need to know everything," I said, reaching for a notepad and pen. The woman's name, where they lived, how long it had been going on. Margaret, you've just had a terrible shock. Maybe you should give yourself time to process. I've wasted enough time living in ignorance, I cut her off. I won't waste another moment. By the time I hung up, I had what little information Ellie could provide. The woman's first name was possibly Valerie. Howard had been spotted multiple times over the years in the Back Bay area of Boston. Ellie had once seen him entering a brownstone on Commonwealth Avenue, but couldn't remember the exact address. It wasn't much, but it was a starting point. I spent the next hour in Howard's office, a room I'd barely entered since his death. His desktop computer was password protected, but I knew where he kept his notebook of login information, hidden in a hollowed-out copy of The Art of Engineering on his bookshelf. Howard had always been methodical, if not particularly creative with his hiding places. As I entered his password, I felt like an intruder in my own home. The background of his computer was a photo of our family, Howard, me, Marcel, and Ben at Ben's college graduation. We were all smiling. Had it been genuine? Had any of it been real? I started with his email accounts. The one I knew about contained nothing suspicious. Work correspondence, family communications, the digital detritus of a normal life. But when I checked his browser history, I found it had been meticulously cleared. Howard, who could barely operate his smartphone, had been careful enough to delete his tracks. In the desk drawer, I found statements for a credit card I'd never known about, mailed to his office at the engineering firm rather than our home. The statements revealed years of purchases in Boston, restaurants, jewelry stores, even tuition payments to a private school. My hands shook as I examined a charge from Tiffany & Co's dated February 14th, 7 years ago. The same Valentine's Day when he'd claimed to have lost my gift during a business trip and had presented me with a hastily purchased replacement a week later. Outside, the Vermont maples were aflame with autumn colors, a spectacular show I'd normally appreciate from my porch with a cup of tea. Today, they were just a blur of red and gold beyond the window, as I methodically pieced together evidence of my husband's betrayal. My phone rang again, Marcel returning my call sooner than I'd expected. "I've cleared my schedule," she said without preamble. "I can talk now." "How did you find out?" I asked, skipping any pretense of normal conversation. I heard her inhale deeply before responding. "I saw Dad in Boston. I was there for a conference and spotted him having dinner with them at an Italian restaurant in the North End. He didn't see me." "And you confronted him?" "Not right away. I followed him after dinner. They went back to a brownstone on Commonwealth Avenue. They looked happy, Mom. Normal. Like us, but different." Each word was a fresh cut. I pressed on. "When did you finally confront him?" 2 weeks later. I drove to his office and waited for him after work. He tried to deny it at first, but when I told him exactly what I'd seen..." She paused. "He broke down, told me everything." "Which was what, exactly?" My academic training had kicked in. The part of me that could distance itself and analyze information objectively, even as another part crumbled. "He'd been living a double life for over 25 years, Mom. Her name is Valerie Simmons. She was the structural engineer he met on a project in Boston. They have 2 children, a son who's 25 now and a daughter who's 23. 25 years, more than half our marriage. While I was raising our children, teaching my students, caring for my aging parents, and supporting his career, Howard had been building a parallel life just a few hours away. Did Ben know too? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Dad told him after I found out. He made us promise not to tell you, said he would do it himself after he figured out the right way. Then he got sick, and it never seemed like the right time. He died still keeping this secret, I said, the reality of it settling into my bones. And you all helped him keep it. Mom, he was dying. What good would it have done? Marcel's voice cracked. We were trying to protect you. Protect me, I repeated, the word bitter in my mouth, by denying me the truth about my own life. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I've wanted to tell you so many times. That's why I've been distant. I couldn't look at you without feeling like I was betraying you all over again. We talked for another hour. Marcel shared what little she knew about Howard's other family. Valerie believed Howard was divorced from me early in their relationship. The children, my husband's other children, knew he had 2 older children from a previous marriage, but had never met them. Howard had maintained the fiction that he traveled extensively for work, allowing him to split his time between two households, two lives. After we hung up, I sat motionless at Howard's desk, surrounded by evidence of his deception. The office had always been his sanctuary, and now I understood why. It had been the control center for his elaborate lie. My mind raced with questions. How had he managed to maintain the deception for so long? Who else had known? What had been real in our relationship, and what had been performance? And more pressingly, what was I going to do now? The woman I had been yesterday, the grieving widow still coming to terms with losing her husband of 40 years, no longer existed. In her place was someone else entirely, someone facing not just the loss of a spouse, but the loss of her own history. I had spent my career teaching American history, helping students understand how individual lives were shaped by larger historical forces and personal choices. Now my own personal history had been revealed as partially fraudulent, a story with critical chapters hidden from me by the person I had trusted most. The grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from Howard's parents, chimed noon, pulling me from my thoughts. I had been sitting at his desk for hours, sifting through physical evidence of betrayal. I stood and walked to the living room window, looking out at the street where we had lived for 35 years. Neighbors who had known us as the perfect Whitaker family, the respected professor and the successful engineer, with their two accomplished children. Had they known? Had they whispered about Howard's absences, his business trips that seemed more frequent than those of other husbands? My reflection in the glass caught me by surprise. I looked the same as I had yesterday, silver-streaked dark hair cut in a practical bob, the reading glasses hanging from a chain around my neck. The lines earned from 67 years of living etched around my eyes and mouth. But I felt unrecognizable to myself. I made a decision then, standing in the living room of the house that had witnessed decades of my unknowing complicity in Howard's deception. I would not remain in the dark any longer. I would not accept the edited version of my life that others had decided was enough for me. I went upstairs and pulled my suitcase from the closet, the same one I had used for academic conferences and family vacations. I began to pack methodically, practical clothes, comfortable shoes, toiletries. I added the folder of evidence I had collected from Howard's office and the iPad with the damning photograph. Eleanor called as I was loading my suitcase into the trunk of my car. "Where are you going, Margaret?" she asked when I told her my plans. "Boston," I replied. "I'm going to meet the other Mrs. Whitaker." "Are you sure that's wise? What do you hope to accomplish?" I paused, considering her question seriously. "I need to see her with my own eyes, Ellie. I need to understand what he saw in her, what made him choose to live this way. I need to know if she's as much a victim in this as I am, or if she knowingly participated in destroying my reality. And then what? I don't know yet," I admitted. "But for the first time in 2 years, no, for the first time in 25 years, though I didn't know it, I'm making my own decisions based on the actual truth, not a convenient fiction created to keep me complacent." "Do you want me to come with you?" Ellie asked, concern evident in her voice. "No," I said. "This is something I need to do alone, but I'll call you when I get there." As I pulled out of my driveway, I glanced at the GPS screen where I had entered the address Marcel had reluctantly provided. Commonwealth Avenue, Back Bay, Boston. 4 hours away, according to the estimated arrival time. 4 hours to prepare myself to look into the face of the woman who had unknowingly shared my husband, my life, my reality for 25 years. 4 hours to decide who Margaret Whitaker would be now that the woman she had been for 40 years no longer existed. The drive from Burlington to Boston gave me too much time with my thoughts. 4 hours of replaying memories, re-examining them through this new, devastating lens. The weekend trips Howard would take alone to clear his head. The conferences that always seemed to run long. The late-night phone calls he'd take in his study with the door closed. All these moments I'd accepted without question now revealed themselves as opportunities for him to step into his other life. Rain began to fall as I crossed the state line into Massachusetts, streaking across my windshield like tears. I had cried very little since discovering the photo. The shock had cauterized my emotions, leaving me numb in places where pain should be. Boston's familiar skyline appeared through the gray curtain of rain as I approached the city. I'd visited dozens of times over the years for academic conferences, museum exhibitions, and weekend getaways with Howard. Had he suggested those trips to be close to his other family? Had we ever unknowingly crossed paths with them on Newbury Street or in the public garden? The GPS directed me to a hotel in Back Bay where I'd made a reservation, just a few blocks from the address Marcel had given me. I couldn't risk showing up at Valerie's doorstep road-weary and emotionally raw. I needed time to compose myself, to decide exactly what I would say to the woman who had unknowingly shared my husband. After checking in, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and opened my laptop. A quick search brought up Valerie Simmons' professional profile. She was indeed a structural engineer, currently a partner at a well-regarded Boston firm. Her photograph showed the same woman from Marcel's accidental text: warm brown eyes, elegant features, and an accomplished smile. She was beautiful in an understated way, confident without being intimidating. I found myself wondering what Howard had told her about his absences. Did she believe he traveled frequently for work, just as I had? Did she accept his explanations without question, as I had done for decades? My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was Ben. "Mom, where are you?" His voice carried the same worried tone he'd used when I'd started driving again after Howard's funeral, as if I were fragile, incapable of managing on my own. "I'm in Boston," I replied, seeing no reason to lie. "Marcel told you about the photo." "She did. Look, Mom, I know this is a shock, but coming to Boston isn't going to change anything. Dad is gone. What good can possibly come from confronting this woman?" "The truth," I said simply. "For 40 years, I've lived in a fabricated reality, Ben. Everyone around me, including my own children, knew more about my life than I did. I won't continue in ignorance." "We were trying to protect you," he insisted. "Dad made us promise. Your father lost the right to make demands about my well-being when he decided to build a second life." I cut him off, my voice sharper than I intended. "And you lost the right to decide what I should know about my own life when you chose to keep his secret." Silence fell between us. In that moment, I realized how profoundly Howard's deception had damaged not just my marriage, but my relationship with my children. They had become complicit, believing they were protecting me while actually continuing their father's betrayal. "I'm sorry," Ben finally said, his voice quieter. "You're right. We should have told you." "Yes, you should have." I softened my tone. "But that's in the past now. What matters is what I do with this information going forward." "What are you planning to do?" Concern colored his question. "I'm going to meet her tomorrow. I need to see her, to talk to her, to understand. Do you want me to come? I could fly up from New York tonight." "No," I said firmly. "This is something I need to do alone." After we hung up, I ordered room service and ate mechanically, not tasting the food. Then I laid out my clothes for the next day: a simple navy dress, comfortable walking shoes, the pearl earrings Howard had given me for our 30th anniversary. I wondered now if he had purchased a similar gift for Valerie that same year. I slept fitfully, dreaming of houses with hidden rooms I could never find, of Howard walking through doors that vanished when I tried to follow. Morning came with persistent rain, the kind that seeps into your bones. I dressed carefully, applied minimal makeup, and styled my hair with more attention than usual. This wasn't vanity, it was armor. I needed to face this woman not as a victim, but as an equal. After breakfast in the hotel restaurant, I opened my umbrella and walked the few blocks to Commonwealth Avenue. The elegant brownstones stood in a neat row, timeless and stately. I checked the address again and found myself standing before one with window boxes still displaying the last hardy blooms of summer. This was where my husband had lived his other life, where he had been someone else's husband, someone else's father. I stood in the rain for several minutes, gathering my courage before finally climbing the steps and pressing the doorbell. Long moments passed. I was about to ring again when the door opened. She was smaller in person than I had imagined, though she carried herself with unmistakable dignity. Her chestnut hair, streaked with silver, was pulled back in a simple knot. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, just as I did. The similarity struck me like a physical blow. Recognition flickered in her eyes, followed by confusion, then dawning comprehension. "You're Margaret," she said quietly. Not a question. "Yes." My voice remained steady, though my heart raced. "And you're Valerie." She nodded slowly, then stepped back from the doorway. "You'd better come in." The interior of the brownstone was warmly elegant, filled with art and books. It reminded me disturbingly of my own home in Burlington, as if Howard had recreated the same environment in two different locations, or perhaps had taken elements from each woman's taste to create two harmonious but distinct spaces. She led me to a living room where large windows overlooked the rain-slicked street. "Would you like some tea?" she asked, gesturing for me to sit. "No, thank you." I remained standing, suddenly uncertain now that I was actually here. What did I expect her to say? What did I want from this encounter? "I always wondered if this day would come," Valerie said, moving to stand near the fireplace. "When Howard died, I thought perhaps the secret had died with him. But secrets have a way of surfacing, don't they? You knew about me." Another realization that shouldn't have surprised me, but did. "Not at first," she admitted. "For the first few years, I believed what he told me, that he was divorced, that his ex-wife had custody of his older children, that his work required extensive travel." She paused, her gaze direct. "By the time I discovered the truth, we had 2 children together. We had built a life." "When did you find out?" I asked, needing to understand the timeline of deception. 15 years ago. I found documents in his briefcase, insurance policies listing you as his wife. When I confronted him, he confessed everything. 15 years. She had known the truth for 15 years and had chosen to continue the arrangement, while I remained completely in the dark. "And you stayed with him," I said, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. "Yes." She didn't flinch from my judgment. "I stayed. For my children. For the life we had built. And yes, for Howard. I loved him, despite his profound flaws." "So did I," I said, the words catching in my throat. "For 40 years. Something passed between us then. A recognition of shared experience that transcended the animosity I had expected to feel. We had both loved the same deeply flawed man. We had both built lives around a person who wasn't entirely real." "Please sit," Valerie said again, gesturing to a comfortable armchair. This time I did. "Howard had a heart attack here," she said after a moment. "Did you know that? He was rushed to Massachusetts General. When they asked for his next of kin, he gave them your name. Even in that critical moment, he maintained the separation between his 2 lives." I hadn't known this detail. In the version I'd been told, Howard had suffered his fatal heart attack at a hotel during a business trip. Another lie constructed to maintain the elaborate fiction of his life. "The hospital called you," I said, piecing it together. She nodded. "They did. And I respected his wishes. I stayed away while you were there. I watched his funeral from the back of the church. I grieved alone, as did my children." "Our children," I corrected automatically, then shook my head. "Howard's children, I mean." "Yes." She acknowledged the correction with a slight nod. "Would you like to see them?" "Not in person. I don't think any of us are ready for that. But I have photos." Before I could answer, she crossed to a bookshelf and retrieved a photo album. She hesitated, then sat beside me on the sofa and opened it. "This is Sophia," she said, pointing to a young woman with Howard's eyes and smile. "She's studying architecture at Cornell. And this is James. He works for a tech startup in Cambridge." I stared at the faces of these strangers who were connected to me by blood. Howard's children, who had never known me, just as my children had never known Valerie. 4 people who should have been family to each other, kept apart by one man's decisions. "They don't know about you yet," Valerie said, closing the album. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell them since I saw you standing on my doorstep. They knew their father had been married before and had 2 older children, but they believed that marriage had ended long ago. My children knew the truth," I said. "For the last 3 years of Howard's life, they chose to keep his secret." Pain flashed across her face. "I'm sorry. That must feel like a double betrayal." "It does." I looked around the room, noting photographs of Howard with Valerie's children at graduations, on vacation, celebrating birthdays. The same kinds of moments he had shared with me and our children. "How did you do it, Valerie? How did you continue once you knew the truth?" She was quiet for a long moment, considering. At first, I thought I would leave him. I was furious, devastated. But then I looked at my children, at the life we had built, and I couldn't bring myself to destroy it all. So I made a choice to accept the parts of Howard I could have, to create boundaries that would allow our family to continue. At my expense, I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice, while I remained ignorant. Yes, she admitted, not attempting to justify it. At your expense. I told myself it wasn't my responsibility to tell you the truth. That was Howard's burden to bear. But in protecting my family, I became complicit in deceiving yours. I can't undo that now. Rain pattered against the windows, filling the silence that stretched between us. Two women in their 60s, connected by decades of shared and separate experiences with the same man, trying to navigate the aftermath of his deception. I didn't come here for an apology, I finally said, though I appreciate your honesty now. Why did you come, Margaret? She asked quietly. It was the question I had been asking myself since I packed my suitcase in Burlington. What did I hope to achieve by confronting Howard's other wife? I needed to see you, I said slowly, to confirm you were real, to understand what drew Howard to create this elaborate double life. And maybe, I hesitated, then continued, maybe to find out if anything in my marriage was real, or if it was all a performance. Valerie considered my words, her expression thoughtful. I think Howard compartmentalized his life so completely that both marriages were real to him when he was living them. He wasn't pretending to love either of us. He simply couldn't choose, couldn't integrate these two parts of himself. That doesn't excuse what he did, I said firmly. No, it doesn't, she agreed. Nothing excuses it. But understanding it might help us move forward. She rose and walked to a desk in the corner, opening a drawer. Howard left something for you. He asked me to send it if you ever discovered the truth after his death. My heart raced as she handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Howard's familiar handwriting. I'll give you some privacy, she said, moving toward the door. There's more we should discuss, but take your time. When she had gone, I stared at the envelope for several minutes before finally opening it with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter, dated just weeks before Howard's death. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then you've discovered the truth I couldn't bring myself to tell you in life. There's no excuse for what I've done, no justification that could possibly make sense of the pain I've caused. All I can offer is the truth, finally, after decades of lies. I never stopped loving you. That might seem impossible to believe now, but it's true. My love for Valerie didn't replace or diminish what I felt for you. Instead, I found myself living two separate lives, unable to choose between them, unable to give up either one. What began as a brief affair became something else entirely when Valerie became pregnant with James. I told myself I would end things with her, but I couldn't bring myself to abandon my child. Then Sophia came along, and I became further entangled in this second life I had created. As the years passed, it became harder to imagine confessing the truth. How could I tell you that for decades, I had been living a double life? How could I explain to our children that they had siblings they'd never met? The deception grew until it seemed impossible to dismantle without destroying everyone I loved. I know this letter cannot begin to heal the damage I've done. I know you may never forgive me, and I wouldn't blame you. But please know that my love for you, for our children, for the life we built together, that was real. My greatest regret is that I lacked the courage to be honest with you, to face the consequences of my actions while I still had the chance to make amends. With profound remorse and enduring love, Howard. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and returned it to the envelope. Howard's words offered no comfort, no real explanation that could make sense of 25 years of deception. Just more evidence of his selfishness, his inability to make difficult choices, his willingness to hurt those he claimed to love rather than face the consequences of his actions. Valerie returned with 2 cups of tea, setting one beside me despite my earlier refusal. The simple gesture of hospitality seemed absurdly normal in this surreal situation. Did his letter provide any answers? She asked, sitting across from me. No, I replied honestly. Just more evidence of his selfishness. She nodded, unsurprised. I received a similar letter, full of remorse but lacking in actual accountability. I looked at this woman, who should have been a stranger but who understood my pain with unique precision. "What happens now, Valerie? Where do we go from here?" "That depends on what you want," she said. "If you never want to see me again after today, I'll respect that. If you want to establish some kind of relationship with James and Sophia, I'm open to helping facilitate that, though they'll need time to process everything." "And what about us?" I asked, gesturing between us. Two women who spent decades married to the same man without knowing it, until one of us did. She met my gaze steadily. "I don't expect forgiveness, Margaret. But perhaps in time, we could find a way to move forward that acknowledges our shared history without being defined by Howard's betrayal." The rain had stopped, sunlight breaking through the clouds to cast golden rectangles on the hardwood floor. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at Commonwealth Avenue with its elegant trees and historic facades. "I need time," I said finally. "This is all still too raw." "Of course." She rose as well. "Take whatever time you need. I've written my contact information in this." She handed me a small notepad. If you're ready to talk again, I'll be here." As I prepared to leave, she asked, "Will you tell your children you came to see me?" I considered the question. "Yes, there have been enough secrets. I won't add to them." She walked me to the door, where we stood awkwardly, two women connected by a bond neither of us had chosen. Not quite friends, not quite enemies. Survivors of the same deception. "Howard used to say you were the most resilient person he knew," Valerie said suddenly. "That no matter what life threw at you, you found a way through it with grace." The comment startled me, evidence that Howard had spoken about me to her, had perhaps compared us in ways I couldn't begin to fathom. "He said you were the kindest," I replied, the words emerging before I could consider them. "That your compassion made him want to be a better man." A sad smile crossed her face. "He failed at that, didn't he?" "Yes," I agreed, "in the most fundamental ways." As I walked back to my hotel through streets washed clean by the morning's rain, I felt oddly lighter. Not healed, not even close, but perhaps having taken the first step toward whatever came next. I had confronted the woman who had unknowingly shared my husband, and had found not an enemy, but another person dealing with the aftermath of Howard's selfishness. In my hotel room, I called Ellie, who had been anxiously awaiting news of my confrontation with Valerie. She knew Ellie. For 15 years she knew about me, and chose to continue the arrangement. "That's unforgivable," Ellie declared loyally. "Maybe," I conceded, "but I understand her choice more than I expected to. She was protecting her children, the life she had built." "At your expense," Ellie pointed out. "Yes," I acknowledged, "but the real villain here isn't Valerie. It's Howard." After hanging up, I sat on the bed and opened my laptop. I had planned to drive back to Burlington tomorrow, to resume my life with this new knowledge integrated into my understanding of the past. But something held me back. What life was I returning to? A house full of memories that I now questioned? A community where I would forever wonder who else had known about Howard's deception? Children who had kept me in the dark about fundamental truths of my own existence? On impulse, I opened a browser and searched for extended stay hotels in Boston. Then I called the university and requested a sabbatical, something I had delayed taking for years, always putting Howard's schedule and needs before my own academic pursuits. The dean was surprised but supportive. "You've more than earned it, Margaret. Take all the time you need." Next, I called Marcelle. "I'm staying in Boston for a while," I told her. "I met Valerie today." Her sharp intake of breath was audible. "Mom, are you okay? What happened?" "It was illuminating," I said, unable to fully articulate the complex emotions of the encounter. "I'm not ready to come home yet. I need time to process everything, to figure out who I am now that I know the truth about my life with your father." "Do you want me to come to Boston?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "Not yet," I replied, "but soon. There are conversations we need to have in person." As twilight fell over Boston, I stood at my hotel window, looking out at the city that had been Howard's second home, the city where he had maintained a parallel life for 25 years, the city where, perhaps, I could begin to rebuild my own identity separate from the marriage that had defined me for so long. Tomorrow, I would find an extended stay hotel. I would explore Boston not as a visitor, but as a temporary resident. I would sit in cafes and museums alone, learning to be comfortable with my own company in a way I never had before. I would begin the process of reconciling the life I thought I had lived with the reality that had been hidden from me. And maybe, just maybe, I would discover that Margaret Whittaker still existed beyond the betrayal that had shattered her world, stronger, wiser, and finally in possession of the truth. Morning light filtered through the guest room curtains as I finished dressing, mentally preparing myself for the day ahead. The house was quiet, but I could smell coffee brewing somewhere below. I checked my phone to find more concerned messages from my children and friends, replying only to Eleanor with a brief assurance that I was fine and would call her later. When I descended to the kitchen, I found Valerie already there, dressed in a simple blue sweater and slacks, her hair neatly styled. She looked as though she'd slept as poorly as I had, with shadows beneath her eyes and a certain tightness around her mouth. "Good morning," she said, offering a strained smile. "Coffee?" I accepted the cup she poured me, noting how surreal it felt to engage in such normal morning rituals with this woman who was, by all rights, my rival. Yet, rival didn't quite capture our unique situation. We were more like unwitting colleagues in Howard's elaborate production of a bifurcated life. "I called in sick to work," Valerie said, taking a seat across from me at the kitchen island. "I'm a department head at an architectural firm. First sick day I've taken in 3 years. "I'm retired," I replied. "One of the few advantages of age. No need to call in sick when your life implodes." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "I've been thinking all night about what to do next, about what this means for everything. As have I." We sipped our coffee in silence for a moment. Two women in their 60s whose understanding of their own lives had been fundamentally altered overnight. "Julian and Sophia have questions," Valerie finally said. "Many questions. About you, about your children, about the whole situation. Would you be willing to meet with them properly today? Answer their questions as much as you can?" "Of course," I replied. "They deserve to understand their own history as much as any of us can now." She nodded, relieved. "They'll be here at noon. Julian has canceled his patients for the day." She hesitated, then added, "He's a psychologist, specializes in family trauma, ironically enough. My son Ben works in finance," I offered. "And Marcel is in technology. Both married, no children yet." "Howard's grandchildren that never were," Valerie mused. "He always said he was looking forward to being a grandfather someday." I wondered if Howard had ever considered the implications of his deception for future generations. Had he thought about what would happen when his separate families inevitably expanded? Or had he simply assumed he would navigate that complexity when the time came, as he had navigated everything else? "We should look through his things," I suggested. "Between your house and mine, there must be evidence. Papers, documents, something to help us understand how he managed this for so long." Valerie set down her cup with a decisive click. "Yes, let's start with his office here." Howard's Boston office was on the 2nd floor, a handsomely appointed room with built-in bookshelves and a view of Commonwealth Avenue. It was tidier than his office in Vermont, more deliberately curated, but with the same core elements: engineering journals, technical manuals, family photos carefully arranged. "It's been just as he left it," Valerie said, lingering at the doorway. "I couldn't bring myself to clear it out after the funeral. Sophia has been after me to donate his books, at least, but I kept putting it off." We began our search methodically, dividing the room between us. I took the desk, while Valerie examined the bookshelves. We worked in silence for nearly an hour, the only sounds the rustling of papers and occasional opening and closing of drawers. "Here's something," I said eventually, holding up a small leather-bound calendar. "It only has entries for the days he was supposedly traveling. Look, detailed notes about meetings, client names, hotel information." Valerie came to look over my shoulder. "Those clients don't exist. These meetings never happened. This was all his cover story for being in Vermont with you. And I have calendars at home with equally fictional entries for his supposed business trips to Chicago, Denver, New York, when he was actually here with you." The level of detail in Howard's fabricated professional life was staggering. He hadn't simply made up generic business trips. He had constructed entire fictional projects with fictional clients, fictional colleagues, fictional problems to solve, and milestones to reach. He could have written novels with this level of imagination, Valerie observed, turning a page filled with Howard's precise handwriting detailing a non-existent engineering consultation. Instead, he wrote himself a second life, I replied. We continued our search, finding more evidence of Howard's duplicity. A second passport with slightly different issuance dates, financial records showing careful management of separate accounts, even a small safe containing emergency cash in both dollars and euros. He was prepared for every contingency, Valerie said, sitting back on her heels after we'd opened the safe. Even the possibility of having to flee the country, apparently. I wondered if Howard had ever seriously considered running away if his deception was discovered. Had there been moments when exposure seemed imminent? Close calls that had forced him to contemplate abandoning both his carefully constructed lives? Our search was interrupted by the arrival of Julian and Sophia earlier than expected. I heard their voices downstairs, then footsteps on the stairs. They appeared in the doorway of the office, both looking slightly taken aback to find Valerie and me calmly sifting through their father's things together. We've been finding evidence of your father's arrangements, Valerie explained, rising to her feet. Margaret and I thought it might help us all understand. Julian's expression was carefully neutral. Professional, I realized, recognizing the practiced composure of someone accustomed to hearing difficult revelations without reacting visibly. And has it helped? He asked. It's confirmed what we already knew, I replied, closing the calendar in my hands. Howard went to extraordinary lengths to maintain his deception. But why? Sophia burst out, her composure less practiced than her brother's. Why would he do this? Live like this? It makes no sense. It was the question at the heart of everything, the one none of us could answer with certainty. Howard had taken his reasons to the grave. Let's go downstairs, Valerie suggested. We'll talk properly. In the living room, the four of us formed an awkward tableau. Howard's secret families facing each other across an emotional minefield. Julian had brought coffee and pastries, an oddly normal gesture in such abnormal circumstances. He distributed them now, falling back on social rituals in the absence of any roadmap for our unprecedented situation. I've been thinking about this clinically, he said after we'd all settled. From a psychological perspective, what Dad did fits several patterns of compartmentalized behavior. The ability to separate different aspects of one's life completely is rare but not unheard of. Are you saying he was mentally ill? Sophia asked, a note of hope in her voice, perhaps seeking some explanation that would mitigate her father's culpability. Julian shook his head. Not necessarily. Compartmentalization can be a defense mechanism, but it can also be a deliberately cultivated skill. Spies are trained to do it. Con artists perfect it. Howard was neither a spy nor a con artist, I said, though even as I spoke the words, I questioned their accuracy. Hadn't he been conning us all in a sense? No, Julian agreed. But he clearly had an exceptional ability to separate his two lives and maintain those separations for decades. The question is why he felt compelled to create this situation in the first place, rather than making a clean break from one life before starting another. It was a clinical analysis, detached and rational, but I could hear the pain beneath Julian's measured words. He wasn't just a psychologist theorizing about an interesting case study. He was a son trying to make sense of his father's profound betrayal. I think, Valerie said slowly, that he couldn't bear to lose either of you. She looked at me. He couldn't bring himself to leave you and your children, but he also fell in love with me. Instead of making the hard choice, he tried to have everything. At everyone else's expense, Sophia added bitterly. Yes, Valerie acknowledged. At everyone else's expense. The conversation that followed was one of the most extraordinary of my life. We shared stories about Howard, the man each of us had known, or thought we had known. The patterns emerged, how he had been essentially the same person in both households in many ways, the same interests, the same habits, the same expressions of affection. He always brought me wildflowers on my birthday, I recalled. Never store-bought arrangements. Always wildflowers he claimed to have picked himself on his morning walk. He did the same for me, Valerie said, her voice hollow. For 28 years. Even the anecdotes that should have been unique turned out to be duplicated. The romantic story Howard had told me about how his grandmother's wedding ring had been lost and then miraculously found in a garden decades later. He had told Valerie the same tale, presenting her with a supposedly identical antique ring. Neither ring was likely his grandmother's, I concluded. Just vintage pieces he purchased separately. Everything was a performance, Julian said. A script he performed in 2 different theaters, with 2 different supporting casts. Sophia had been mostly quiet, absorbing the conversation with a pained expression. Now she spoke up. I need to understand the timeline. When exactly did this start? When did he meet you, Mom, in relation to his marriage to Margaret? Valerie and I compared notes, aligning our memories with the evidence we had discovered that morning. We met at a conference in Boston, Valerie recalled. Howard said he was recently divorced, still raw from the separation. That was in 1997. We had been married for 12 years at that point, I said. Marcel was 14, Ben was 11. Howard had just made partner at his engineering firm in Burlington. So he started this whole deception when he was in his 40s, Julian observed. That's unusual. Most double lives begin earlier, from what I've studied. He was in Boston often that year, I remembered. The Big Dig project. He said his firm had been brought in as consultants. The Big Dig, Valerie repeated. That's where we met. I was a junior architect then, working on structural elements. The pieces were falling into place. Howard's legitimate work on Boston's massive infrastructure project had provided the perfect cover for beginning his relationship with Valerie. And once that relationship had become serious, rather than choosing between his established family and his new love, he had simply decided to maintain both. As noon stretched into afternoon, Julian ordered lunch delivery. We ate at the dining table, an incongruously normal family meal under the circumstances. The conversation shifted from the past to the present, from Howard's deceptions to our current situation. What happens now? Sophia asked, looking between Valerie and me. With Howard's estate, I mean. Legally speaking. It was a practical question I hadn't yet considered, too consumed by the emotional aspects of our discovery. I'm not sure, I admitted. In Vermont, I am Howard's legal widow. I inherited everything. The house, his share of the engineering firm, his investments, insurance. He had separate accounts here, Valerie said. Our house is in both our names. There's a life insurance policy that paid out to me. So he managed to duplicate even his estate planning, Julian observed, without either system discovering the fraud. I'm not interested in challenging any of that, I said, surprising myself with how deeply I meant it. I don't want anything from your mother or from you. What Howard left you was rightfully yours. Valerie studied me for a long moment. Thank you for that. But there are legal complexities we may need to address eventually. After lunch, Julian suggested a walk, sensing perhaps that we all needed fresh air and movement after the emotional intensity of the morning. The 4 of us strolled along Commonwealth Avenue Mall, the tree-lined promenade that runs through the center of the street. The autumn day was bright but cool, the maples and oaks displaying their fall colors against the backdrop of historic brownstones. Walking beside Valerie with Julian and Sophia a few paces ahead, I was struck by how quickly our relationship had evolved from strangers to something approaching allies. We were united by shared betrayal, by the common experience of loving and being deceived by the same man. You know, Valerie said quietly, I keep expecting to feel angry with you, or jealous, but I don't. I just feel connected, like we're members of a very exclusive, very unfortunate club. I understand, I replied. It's difficult to maintain anger toward a fellow victim. She glanced at me. Is that how you see yourself? As a victim? I considered the question carefully. Yes and no. Howard violated my trust in the most profound way imaginable. In that sense, I was victimized. But I refused to let that define the rest of my life. Ahead of us, Julian had his arm around Sophia's shoulders, comforting his younger sister as she wiped away tears. Their silhouettes against the autumn trees formed a poignant tableau of familial support in crisis. I've been thinking about your children, Valerie said. They knew about us at the end. They met their father's death, knowing this terrible secret, unable to share it with you. Yes, I acknowledged, the familiar pang of betrayal resurfacing. They thought they were protecting me. Perhaps they were, Valerie suggested. Would knowing have made Howard's death easier for you, or infinitely more complicated? It was a question I had asked myself repeatedly over the past 24 hours. Would I have preferred to know the truth while Howard was dying? To confront him on his deathbed with his betrayal? Or was it a mercy in its way to have grieved the man I thought I knew before discovering the man he actually was? I don't know, I admitted. But I do know that I would have preferred the choice to be mine, not made for me by others. When we returned to the brownstone, I found several missed calls from Ben and Marcel on my phone. I excused myself to the guest room to return their calls, bracing myself for their reaction to my continued presence in Valerie's home. Marcel answered immediately. "Mom, what are you doing?" she demanded without preamble. "Why are you still in that house?" "I'm learning about our family," I replied calmly. "About the truth Howard kept from all of us. But with her? With them?" Marcel's voice was strained. "They're not your family, Mom. We are. They're as much victims of your father's deception as we are," I said firmly. "And they're connected to us, whether we like it or not." Howard made sure of that. The conversation that followed was difficult. Both Marcel and Ben, whom she conferenced in, seemed unable to understand my choice to engage with Valerie's family directly. They saw it as a betrayal, as taking sides against them somehow. "You need to come home, Mom," Ben insisted. "This isn't healthy." "I'll come home when I'm ready," I replied. "I'm a grown woman, Ben, not a confused child. I'm exactly where I need to be right now." After ending the call, I sat on the edge of the bed, weary from the emotional toll of navigating not only my own feelings, but those of everyone connected to Howard's deception. The man himself had escaped this reckoning, leaving the rest of us to sort through the wreckage of his choices. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Sophia, her expression hesitant. "My brother and I were talking," she said. "We'd like to meet your children if they're willing. We think it might help everyone to meet face to face." The suggestion was both logical and terrifying. The idea of bringing all of Howard's children together, of forcing them to confront each other's existence in the flesh rather than as abstract concepts, was fraught with emotional risk. "I'll suggest it to them," I said, "but I can't promise they'll agree." Sophia nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. "It's just that they're our half-siblings. We share blood. That means something, doesn't it? Even under these circumstances?" I thought of Ben and Marcel, of how fiercely they had always protected each other despite their differences. Would they be able to extend any of that instinctive familial loyalty to these newly discovered half-siblings? Or would they reject the very idea of connection with Howard's secret family? "It should mean something," I agreed. "But I can't predict how they'll respond." When Sophia left, I texted both my children. "Julian and Sophia would like to meet you. Please consider it, if not for them, then for me. This is part of our family history now, whether we like it or not." Their responses were predictably resistant, but I could sense an underlying curiosity, particularly from Marcel. The human desire to know, to understand, was powerful. I suspected that eventually they would agree to the meeting, if only to see for themselves these people who shared their blood. I rejoined the others downstairs, where Valerie was showing Julian some old photographs she had found in Howard's office. They made space for me on the couch, including me in their examination of the visual evidence of Howard's compartmentalized life. "Look at this," Valerie said, pointing to a photo of Howard on what appeared to be a fishing trip. "Does this look familiar to you?" I studied the image. Howard in waders, standing in a mountain stream, proudly holding up a trout. "Yes, that's from a trip he took to Montana with colleagues. Around 2010, I think." Valerie produced another photo. Howard in identical fishing gear, with an almost identical trout, but with a slightly different background. "He told me this was from a fishing trip with clients in Colorado. Same year." "He couldn't even keep his vacation photos straight?" Julian said, incredulous. "That seems needlessly risky." "Or compulsive," I suggested, as if he needed to duplicate everything to maintain perfect symmetry between his two lives. We continued through the photos, finding more examples of Howard's duplications. Similar Christmas mornings in different houses, similar birthday celebrations, similar beach vacations. The pattern was both disturbing and fascinating, offering a glimpse into Howard's psychological need to balance his dual existence. As evening approached, Valerie prepared dinner, a simple pasta dish that reminded me, with a pang, of meals Howard used to cook in our Vermont kitchen. We ate together in the dining room, the conversation now flowing more naturally as the initial shock of our situation gave way to a tentative acceptance. "I'd like to see where you lived with Dad," Sophia said suddenly. "Your house in Vermont. Would that be possible?" The question caught me off guard. "Yes, I suppose it would, if you wanted to make the trip. I think it would help," she explained, "to see his other home, to understand how he lived when he wasn't here." "You could come back with me when I leave," I offered, surprising myself with the suggestion. "Stay for a day or two, if you wanted." Valerie set down her fork. "Actually, I think I'd like to see it too, if that wouldn't be too strange for you." The idea of Howard's Boston family visiting his Vermont home should have felt invasive, inappropriate. Instead, I found myself warming to the concept. There was something fitting about bringing together these two halves of Howard's fractured existence, about allowing his separate worlds to finally intermingle. "I think that would be healing, somehow," I said, "for all of us." And so it was decided. The next day, Valerie, Julian, and Sophia would drive back to Burlington with me. We would inform my children of the plan, hoping they might join us there, bringing together all the broken pieces of Howard's double life in one place for the first time. That night, lying in the guest bed that was becoming strangely familiar, I found myself thinking not about Howard, but about Valerie, about the strength she had shown in the face of this devastating revelation, about the grace with which she had welcomed me into her home, her life, despite the pain my very existence had caused her. In the darkness, I allowed myself to acknowledge a surprising truth. In Valerie Simmons, Howard's other wife and unwitting partner in his deception, I had found something unexpected, a kindred spirit, perhaps even the beginnings of friendship. It was yet another outcome Howard could never have anticipated when he constructed his elaborate dual life. The man who had divided himself between two families could never have imagined that, in the aftermath of his death, those families might choose to come together, finding connection in their shared experience of loving and losing the same complex, deeply flawed human being. The drive back to Vermont passed in unexpected companionship. Valerie sat beside me in the passenger seat, while Julian and Sophia followed in their car. We talked about everything and nothing, our careers, our childhoods, our shared experiences with Howard's little habits and quirks. It was surreal, yet somehow comforting, this connection with the woman who had unwittingly shared my husband. As we crossed the Vermont state line, the familiar green mountains welcomed me home. But the landscape felt different now, transformed by the knowledge I carried. The life I had lived here for decades was not what I had believed it to be. "It's beautiful," Valerie said, gazing at the autumn foliage painting the hillsides. "Howard always spoke fondly of Vermont." "At least that wasn't a lie," I replied. We arrived at my house in late afternoon. The colonial stood solid and unassuming, giving no hint of the complicated history it contained. I watched Valerie's face as she took in the home Howard had shared with me, searching for any sign of jealousy or resentment. Instead, I saw only curiosity and a certain wistfulness. "It's exactly as I imagined," she said softly, from Howard's descriptions. Inside, the house held echoes of Howard everywhere. His books on the shelves, his favorite chair by the fireplace, the grandfather clock he had lovingly maintained. Valerie moved through the rooms slowly, absorbing this other side of her husband's life. Sophia examined the family photos on the mantel. "We have the same eyes," she observed, studying a picture of Ben. "And Dad's chin." Julian stood in Howard's office doorway, taking in the space where his father had worked during his Vermont life. "Two offices, two homes, two families," he mused. "Yet somehow the same man." I had texted Marcel and Ben our arrival time, unsure if they would accept my invitation to meet. As I was showing Valerie the garden Howard had meticulously maintained, the sound of car tires on the gravel driveway announced visitors. Marcel arrived first, her expression tense but determined. She hesitated when she saw Valerie, but then stepped forward, extending her hand. "I'm Marcel," she said simply. "Valerie," Howard's other wife replied, taking her hand. "Thank you for coming." Ben arrived 30 minutes later, his New York efficiency evident in his brisk walk and cautious eyes. He kept his distance initially, observing the interactions between his sister and Howard's Boston family with guarded curiosity. That evening, the 6 of us sat around my dining table. Howard's children from 2 marriages, Howard's wives from 2 lives, sharing a meal and stories. The initial awkwardness gradually gave way to moments of surprising connection. "He told the same bad jokes in both houses," Julian observed, after Marcel recounted one of Howard's favorite punchlines. "And made the same breakfast every Sunday," Sophia added. "French toast with cinnamon. Always burned the edges," Ben contributed, speaking directly to Sophia for the first time. "Always," she agreed with a small smile. As the evening progressed, I watched these 4 adults, all shaped by Howard's love and Howard's deception, find tentative common ground in their shared experience. They were strangers connected by blood, bound by a secret none of them had created, but all of them now carried. After dinner, Marcel pulled me aside in the kitchen. "I understand now," she said quietly, "why you needed to do this. To see them. To know them. They're part of our story now," I replied. "For better or worse. They seem good. Normal." She glanced back toward the dining room. "I've been so angry at Dad. At them. At you for going there. But seeing them here. In our house. They're just people. People he hurt. Same as us." In the living room, Ben was showing Julian Howard's collection of vintage engineering tools, their heads bent together over the glass case, the resemblance between them striking despite their different coloring. Valerie and Sophia sat by the fireplace, looking through a photo album I had placed on the coffee table. For the first time since discovering the photograph that had unraveled my reality, I felt something close to peace. Not acceptance, I would never accept what Howard had done, but a kind of resolution. The secret was out, the separate worlds merged. Whatever happened next, we would face it with open eyes. Later, after Marcel and Ben had left with promises to return for breakfast, I sat with Valerie on the porch, watching the stars emerge above the Vermont hills. "What will you tell people?" she asked. "Friends? Colleagues? About us?" I had been pondering this question myself. The truth, I think. A simplified version, but the truth. That Howard had another family that neither of us knew, and that we've chosen to connect rather than blame each other. She nodded. "It will be scandalous for a while. Then something else will happen, and people will move on to the next drama. And we'll still be here figuring out our new normal." "Do you think there's room in your life for all of us?" Valerie asked, her question direct yet gentle. "For an expanded family you never asked for?" The woman I had been a week ago, the grieving widow still living in the shadow of her supposedly perfect marriage, would have rejected the very idea. But that woman was gone, transformed by truth and by the unexpected connections that had emerged from Howard's betrayal. "I think," I said carefully, "that Howard took enough from us with his lies. I won't let him take the possibility of connection too." The next morning, all 6 of us gathered for breakfast. As I moved around my kitchen with Valerie, our movements falling into an easy rhythm, as if we had cooked together for years, I marveled at the strange new family Howard's deception had ultimately created. Marcel and Sophia were exchanging phone numbers, making plans to meet in Boston the following month. Ben was telling Julian about a property he was considering in Vermont, not far from Burlington. Howard's children, half-siblings who had grown up without knowing of each other's existence, were taking the first tentative steps toward a relationship. Looking at them, I felt something I hadn't expected: gratitude. Not for Howard's betrayal, which remained unforgivable, but for the resilience of the human heart, for our capacity to forge connection even from the ashes of deception. Later that day, after the Boston contingent had departed with promises to stay in touch, I walked alone through my garden. Howard had planted these perennials, had shaped this landscape with his hands. Those hands had also built another home, tended another garden, embraced another woman. The knowledge still hurt, but the pain had transformed into something more complex, more nuanced. I picked up my phone and called Eleanor, who had been waiting anxiously for updates. "They've gone back to Boston," I told her. "But we've made plans to get together again." "And how do you feel about that?" she asked cautiously. I considered the question, looking out over the mountains that had witnessed my old life and would now bear witness to whatever came next. "I feel like I'm finally writing my own story," I said. "Not the one Howard wrote for me, not the one my children tried to protect me from. My own. And what does that story look like, Maggie? I smiled, feeling the autumn sun warm on my face. I don't know yet, but for the first time in a long time, I'm curious to find out. The photograph that revealed my husband's secret changed everything, but it also gave me something unexpected. Freedom from a life built on lies, and the chance to create something true from the pieces that remained. If you've experienced deception or betrayal, know that you're not alone. I found strength I never knew I had. If my story touched you, please hit that subscribe button and share your own experiences in the comments below.